I've always been a practical man. I don't have much time for superstitions or old wives' tales, and I've never believed in curses. But lately, things around the farm have been so bad it's made me wonder. The past year has been pretty brutal. Crops are failing, and vandals have been sneaking onto the property at night. I'm struggling to keep the farm afloat. I feel like I'm fighting a losing battle. With Halloween just around the corner, things are getting worse. Groups of local kids have been daring each other to sneak onto my land, screaming and trampling the fields. I've chased them off a few times, but they always come back at night. The day before Halloween came, and I needed to visit the local general store to pick up some supplies. Mr. Simmons, the store's owner, noticed the tired look on my face and warmly engaged me in conversation. "You look like you've seen better days, John," he said, leaning over the counter with a knowing look in his eyes. I let out a heavy sigh. My heart felt like a stone in my chest. "It's these kids, Mr. Simmons. They're all over my fields, trampling the crops, stealing the Halloween pumpkins. I've tried so much to keep them away, but they just keep coming back. I'm at my wit's end." Mr. Simmons nodded slowly, as if he'd heard this story 1,000 times before. "What you need is a scarecrow. But not just any scarecrow. The Old Harper Scarecrow. It's got a way of keeping folks off your land. If you believe the stories, that is." I eyed him skeptically. "The Harper Scarecrow? I've never heard of it." Mr. Simmons' eyes darkened, almost seeming to change from blue to black. He glanced around the store, as if making sure no one else was listening. I wondered if he was slightly crazy. "It's an old legend around these parts, from way before your time, said to ward off anything that comes near. It's been passed down through my family for generations. It scared the life out of folks who dared cross it. People say it's cursed, but maybe that's just talk." I was at my wit's end, willing to try anything at this point. "What's the catch?" I asked. "No catch. I've got it out back. It's been in storage for years. You can take it, free of charge, on one condition." "What's that?" "Once you put it up, you don't take it down. And whatever you do, don't look it in the eyes," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I shrugged my nagging sense of unease off. "Sure, I'll give it a try. Can't hurt, right?" That night, I dragged the rough, misshapen form across my decimated pumpkin field and placed it right in the middle, against a wooden post. It was a ghastly thing, with a ragged shirt and trousers that flapped wildly in the wind. And its face was the worst part. It had deep, hollow eyes that seemed to watch me, no matter which direction I stood. The unease persisted, but I shook it off. It was just an old scarecrow after all. I secured it to the post and headed back inside, trying to ignore the damp chill that descended over me. My little daughter Sarah came out to see what I was up to. "Come on, back inside," I said, a bit too sharply. I didn't want her anywhere near that creepy thing. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Strange noises drifted in from outside. Rustlings in the corn, footsteps crunching through dry leaves, and what sounded like faint whisperings. I wondered how stupid I must have been to listen to that crazy old man's nonsense. It's obvious the vandals must be back. But my unease continued, and an unnatural coldness crept through me, settling deep in my bones. I got up, peered through the window, and there was the scarecrow, standing in the same spot, watching with its eyeless gaze. The next morning, I went out to check on the pumpkins, and to my surprise, the scarecrow had moved. It was no longer facing the road, but had turned slightly, its head tilted, its hollow eyes now fixed on my house. Another creeping coldness came over me, but I pushed the unease aside once more. Maybe the wind had blown it around a bit. Over the next few days, the strange occurrences continued. Every morning, I'd find the scarecrow in a different position. Its head would be tilted further, its arms stretched out wider, its posture becoming more human. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, and I moved around the farm doing my usual jobs. but it was getting harder to brush off. The old man's warning echoed in my mind, "Don't look it in the eyes." But some strange compulsion was urging me to do so, to confront this superstitious nonsense once and for all. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. I kept watch from my bedroom window, my eyes fixed on the field. Just after midnight, I saw it happen. The scarecrow stepped down from its post, moving slowly but deliberately straight towards my house. My heart racing, I grabbed my shotgun, running outside with a mix of fear and fury. "All right, that's enough," I shouted, pointing the gun at the spiky figure. But just as I was about to pull the trigger, the scarecrow vanished. 1 second there, the next, gone. I spun around, frantically looking, and that's when I saw it, standing right behind me. Before I could react, I felt a powerful force sucking me backwards, dragging me towards the scarecrow's post. I tried to scream, but my breath was knocked out of me when I slammed into the wood. My body went stiff, my skin hardened, becoming rough like burlap. I felt my lips clamp shut, sealed with invisible thread, my arms and legs locked in place. I was trapped, unable to move, unable to speak. And then I watched as the scarecrow, no, the thing wearing my face, turned and walked back towards my house. It moved just like me, even wearing my clothes, its steps confident, like it had done this 1,000 times before. I tried to cry out, to warn my family, but I no longer had a tongue or air in my lungs. I was a prisoner in another body, forced to watch, powerless, helpless. Days blurred into weeks, then into months. I could only stare as the imposter lived my life, my family none the wiser. I could feel my mind starting to slip, even the numb despair becoming a hazy memory. Halloween night came again. I could hear Sarah and her brother laughing, see the decorations on the porch, the lights flickering in the evening dark. My wife and the kids were playing hide and seek outside, running around the yard. I watched them move closer to the field, closer to where I was. I tried again to scream, to move, to do anything, but I was frozen in place, my mouth brittle, dry, and sewn shut. Sarah, my beautiful, precious daughter, came running towards me, my dry, lifeless body the perfect hiding spot. She tripped and fell near the post, her small hands grabbing the rough wood as she tried to steady herself. She stood up, dusting herself off, and turned back to the house, but something held her back. She turned, looked at me, or at least in my direction. Her eyes were wide and her smile faded into a look of confusion, and then fear. She took a hesitant step back, sensing something was wrong. The imposter called out to her from the porch, its voice calm and warm. "Come on back now, Sarah. Time to head inside." Sarah hesitated, then began to walk obediently back towards the house, glancing over her shoulder at me one last time. I wanted to believe that she knew, that somehow she could see the truth. But she kept walking, and my hope crumbled into despair. As dawn broke and the first light of morning began to spill over the fields, I saw it. There, just a few yards away from me, was another post, smaller, newer. I strained to make it out through the growing light. The sun's rays lengthened, and now I could just make out the shape of a tiny figure perched high on the post, a new scarecrow. As the sun fully rose, I saw her face, the same small dress, the burlap pulled tight across her features, her eyes wide and staring, filled with the same terror I felt. I wanted to scream, to bellow, to thrash, to do anything, but I was locked in place, motionless. I could only stare at my daughter, now trapped like me, forever cursed to be another silent guardian in this God-forsaken field. And then, as the sun lit her face, I saw her eyes flicker with understanding. She knew what had happened. As night fell, I heard familiar footsteps approaching. The imposter stopped before us, reaching out to gently stroke my daughter's burlap cheek with my own calloused hand. In that moment, I realized our nightmare had only just begun.
In 1981, the US military didn't just close Camp Hero, they sealed it. If this sounds familiar, it should. Netflix Stranger Things creators admitted their secret government facility was inspired by this very real base. But the truth about Montauk is far darker than fiction. Tons of concrete poured into underground chambers, classified equipment stripped out overnight. Local residents watched convoys of unmarked trucks disappear into the base at 3 a.m., while the massive SAGE radar dish, powerful enough to fry seabirds in mid-flight, spun wildly for 3 straight days. Then silence. Today, that radar dish stands frozen, pointed at something the government doesn't want us to see. Camp Hero is now a state park, but motion sensors still guard empty bunkers, and military-grade security cameras watch an abandoned base. The official story? Coastal Defense Station, nothing more. But declassified MK Ultra files suggest the government was neck-deep in mind control experiments right here. Right when locals reported their electronics going haywire and time itself seemed to skip like a scratched record. To understand what really happened at Montauk, we need to go back to 1943 and the Navy's infamous Philadelphia experiment. Declassified documents confirm the military was attempting to develop radar invisibility technology. But, according to multiple witnesses, they achieved something far more dangerous. The USS Eldridge didn't just vanish from Philadelphia's naval yard. Sailors reported seeing it materialize in Norfolk, Virginia, before snapping back to Philadelphia. The crew's fate? Classified. But rumors persisted of men being found fused into the ship's metal hull, their screens permanently embedded in the steel. By the 1970s, Camp Hero's underground facilities were humming with something much bigger than coastal defense. Like Hawkins' lab, this seemingly innocent military installation masked a multi-level underground research facility. The base's SAGE radar system, officially designed to detect Soviet bombers, was being used for a darker purpose. Local fishermen's radios picked up fragments of bizarre transmissions, voices speaking backwards, sequences of numbers that caused splitting headaches, and sounds that witnesses described as what static would sound like if it could scream. In the dead of the night, residents would wake simultaneously from the same nightmare, a dark figure moving through endless tunnels, while time itself seemed to bend and fold around them. Then, Preston Nichols came forward. A former technical contractor at Camp Hero, Nichols revealed what the massive radar dish was really broadcasting. Frequencies designed to manipulate human consciousness, particularly in young subjects. The SAGE radar system could generate electromagnetic fields strong enough to alter human brain patterns, and something far worse. According to Nichols and other whistleblowers, one experiment in particular went catastrophically wrong. They claim a young psychic subject strapped into the Montauk chair, a device designed to amplify psychic abilities, manifested something from another dimension. Whatever emerged was powerful enough to tear through steel doors and concrete walls. Military personnel who encountered it reportedly suffered severe psychological trauma, with several committed to psychiatric care still unable to coherently describe what they saw. The base's sudden shutdown and flooding with concrete allegedly came immediately after this incident. Locals reported seeing prowling shadows near the base perimeter. But these weren't normal shadows. Witnesses described them as having mass, like patches of darkness that seemed to breathe. The most disturbing evidence emerged on July 13th, 2008, when something washed up on Ditch Plains Beach, less than 3 miles from Camp Hero. The locals who found it had never seen anything like it. A hairless, leathery creature with a beak-like face, like something that had crawled through a portal from another dimension. Between 2008 and 2015, 3 more unidentified creatures washed up along this stretch of the coastline. They were quickly removed by hazmat-suited officials who never released their findings. Witnesses described the last specimen as seeming to still be in the process of becoming something else when it was found. In 2019, a thermal imaging drone captured something that should have been impossible. Flying over the supposedly abandoned base, it recorded heat signatures deep within the sealed structure. Heat signatures that moved in patterns no known animal would make. More disturbing still, the thermal patterns seemed to shift and split, as if the entity was existing in multiple states simultaneously. Moments later, an electromagnetic pulse crashed the drone's systems. The recovered footage supposedly showed something emerging from one of the sealed bunker doors, something that appeared to bend and distort the air around it before the camera failed. Analysis of the final frames showed what experts called temporal smearing, as if the creature was moving through multiple moments in time at once. Local paranormal investigators have catalogued over 50 separate sightings of what they believe to be the same entity since 1983. Reports describe it as constantly changing, like watching evolution happen in real time, and moving like it's remembering how to exist in our dimension. While millions stream fictional stories about secret government labs and psychic children, the real facility that inspired them sits in plain sight on Long Island's coast. But, unlike the monsters of Stranger Things, the entity that escaped from Camp Hero wasn't confined to a single town or a single dimension. The next time you're driving past Camp Hero at night and your radio starts picking up voices that don't quite sound human, remember, you're not watching a show you can turn off. You're just another witness to something that never stopped emerging. And unlike Hawkins' lab, this nightmare may still be hunting for new subjects.
I had always hated Halloween. It just seemed such nonsense, and it genuinely spooked me out, though I always tried hard to make it fun for my son Aidan. After a brief trick-and-treat trawl, I bathed him, put his pajamas on, read him a story, kissed his soft toffee curls, and headed out to work, leaving him with Mrs. Fernandez, our neighbour. I don't usually work Halloween, but this year I needed the extra cash more than I needed to stay out of all the ghoulish craziness. The last night of the month meant my rent was due tomorrow, and I was nowhere near being able to pay it. Guilt gnawed at me with every mile, knowing he would be missing our cosy bedtime cuddle and chat. Brave little chap that he was, I knew Halloween spooked him a little too, especially after that ridiculously creepy clown show today at school, courtesy of Mr. Giggles, whose face was flexed with the strain of its heavy white grease paint, garish thick red lips, and a huge bulbous honking nose. Mr. Giggles gave me a distinctly dismissive glare when I neglected to fill up his tip hat with any hard cash. I felt he sensed my lack of enthusiasm for his show. So true, but I also literally couldn't manage to give him a cent. Aidan wanted to say goodbye to everyone, but I quickly grabbed his hand and headed off. Halloween night was now in full swing. Between the costume parties, bar crawls, and trick-or-treaters running through the streets, it felt like the city had turned into a madhouse. But there was something else too. The usual celebrations weren't quite as exuberant as usual, and I wondered if there was an underlying unease, due to the news of reports of a man the internet had dubbed Cackles the Carver, a knife-wielding serial killer who, it was rumoured, screamed with laughter while slaughtering his victims. I had regretfully decided to call it a night when a new request flashed up. It was a juicy one, with a number of stops along the way, and it could earn me the final amount I needed to pay my rent in the morning. I accepted the booking, already feeling perky at the thought that I could keep Aidan safe another month. I pulled up to the corner where the app directed me, squinting through the windshield at a dark figure standing under a sterile streetlight. The size and shape told me it was a man, dressed in a black hoodie, his face in shadow. I hesitated, fingers hovering over the lock. Something about this felt wrong. Telling myself I'd had too much Halloween candy, I hit the door lock open button. The back door creaked open, and the hooded figure slipped inside without a word. "Hi there," I said, trying to keep my voice steady.
"Just drive,"
came the reply. The voice was low, casual, controlled. The tone seemed final, a command, not a request. I didn't argue. I followed the sat-nav's directions to his first location. The radio crackled with another update about Cackles the Carver's latest victim, and I quickly switched it off. The silence that followed was suffocating. Suddenly, a woman stumbled into the street ahead of us. I could see a crashed car in the distance and a man lying in the road. She was covered in blood and waving frantically, her face pale and shocked. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop. My heart raced as I unbuckled my seatbelt and reached for the door.
"What the hell are you doing?"
My passenger snapped, his voice growled. She's hurt, I need to try and help."
"No, you don't."
I turned to face him, my hand still on the door handle. His hood had slipped back just enough for me to now see his face. A greasy, white smear of paint, blood-red lips twisted into a grotesque grin. My blood ran cold. Mr. Giggles, my least favourite entertainer, was sitting in the back seat of my car. Could it be? Was it possible Giggles was Cackles the Carver?
"You see her,"
he said, gesturing towards the woman who was now limping towards the car.
"She's not your problem. Drive."
I couldn't think, couldn't move. My heart hammered against my ribs as I looked towards the woman. She was reaching out with one hand, the other held a wound on her side. Before I could react, the back door opened. The clown monster stepped out, a glint of metal in his hand. The woman froze in terror. He moved so fast I barely registered it. Just a blur of movement, the knife slicing through the air. And then she was on the ground. He threw his head back as a howling cackle came roaring out from deep inside him. When the noise stopped, I stumbled out of the car. "Why are you doing this?" I cried, my voice shaking as I backed away from him. He turned away, wiping the blade clean on her clothes, with the casualness that made the bile rise in my throat.
"Because it's funny, Maya,"
he said, his grin widening.
"Did you think I wasn't funny enough to tip?"
My heart sank, and a deeper fear gripped me now. He remembered me from the school show, and that meant he remembered Aidan.
"You see,"
he said, stepping closer,
"this is your fault. You should have appreciated me when you had the chance."
Quick as lightning, he bent down through my open car door and took the keys out of the ignition, and then he pulled my phone from its holder on the dashboard.
"Get back in the car. I'll do the driving now."
I thought about running, but where would I go? He had my keys and phone. I thought of Aidan sleeping sweetly at home. I would get back to him somehow, no matter how. I got into the car as the killer clown slipped into the driver's seat and turned on the ignition.
"Let's go, Maya,"
he said softly, as if we were just two friends heading to the next stop.
"There's still work to do."
The street is deserted. We pass a bus stop with a lone man sitting at it, hunched over in the cold, eyes glued to his phone. Cackles leaned back in his seat, his face one big twisted grin.
"One last job, Maya,"
he said.
"And then, if you complete it, you're free to go home to Aidan. Pull over."
He handed me the knife, traces of blood still wet on the blade. My hand shook as I took it, my small reflection staring back at me through the metal's tainted surface.
You do this, and little Aidan gets to see you tomorrow,
he said, his voice soft, almost tender.
But if you don't...
He trailed off, but I didn't need him to finish the sentence.
I need you to prove you're a worthy mother. Mothers should be willing to kill to protect their young. Otherwise they are useless and deserve to die themselves. Get out of the car.
I got out, my legs barely able to support me. I thought about Aidan, about what would happen to him without me there. The man at the bus stop didn't even glance up. I noticed he had headphones in, so he wouldn't even hear me approach. I stood there, the cold night air sharp in my lungs. Then, with one last glance back at my tormentor, I did it. The one thing I thought I would never, ever do. I heard the demonic cackle fill the air again. It felt like it would pierce my eardrums. Then I felt a hot, rancid voice whisper in my ear.
Well done. You've passed the test, Maya. And don't worry. Everyone will think it was me. Happy Halloween.
And then he takes the knife from my hands, and all that is left of him is the sound of footsteps, running, fading into the night mist. I thought I'd been his victim, but now I understood. I wasn't just part of this demonic projection. I was the reason for it. I was his final laugh.